Hello, and welcome to MVAO 202, MainView AutoOperator Performance and EXECs. This is part 1. MVAO 202 is the fifth in an 8-part series of courses covering MainView AutoOperator. When we consider improving the performance of AutoOperator, there are really 4 areas we need to look at. We need to consider our rule set strategies. Are we using filters for the rule sets? What are the sequence of the rules within the rule sets? And what's the quality of the rules? And we're going to take a closer look at each of these in detail. The first thing to consider is the rule set strategy that you have in place for your automation. There are 3 different values we can specify for our overall rule set strategy. The first is first, which says begin at the top of my rule sets, and I want you to scan from the rule set, go through all its rules, the next rule set, all its rules, and keep going until you find a match. And when you find a match for that rule, then stop looking, disregard all the rules that are following that rule. Now, a rule set of all says scan the rule sets from top to bottom and the rules within those rule sets and fire all of the matches for that event. So that will keep everything firing that you want to fire, but unfortunately it requires that all the rule sets and rules be scanned for every event that's seen. Now, the preferred approach is to set an overall rule set strategy of individual, and that allows you to specify independent rule set strategies for each of your rule sets. And in those instances, what you're going to have is a rule set strategy of first on most of your rule sets, and then you may have 1 or 2 that has a strategy of all. Another performance consideration is the use of rule set filtering. And rule set filtering allows you to set a filter at the rule set level to eliminate the rules from being scanned for events that don't apply. We can set the filters for rule sets by the message ID, the message text, event type, or shared or event variables. Typically, the way you're going to use your filtering is first to filter by event type. So you're going to have independent rule sets for each of your types of events. And then for messages, what you will do is break them out into separate rule sets based on the message prefix. And then you can have a more efficient approach that way by setting filters for specific message IDs. Here we can see on the rule set overview that there's an indicator whether there is a filter enabled or disabled. You can see by the circled E in the middle of the display indicates that rule MQCA does have a rule set filter enabled. Now if I want to change the filter for the rule set, all I need to do is type an F in the line command and press enter. That will display a panel where we can specify the filter for the rule set. You can see we can specify the text ID, so if we want to match part of a message ID, we can do so there. We can also specify the event type, and if you don't know what the event types are, you can always put a question mark in the field and press enter. And then at the bottom, we indicate whether we want the filter to be enabled or disabled. We can optionally query variables for the rule set filter. And then we can have criteria set for the firing of rules within the rule set. Now, I do not recommend that you use the criteria filtering at the rule set level. I do strongly recommend you use it at your rule level. So how do we determine what rules go into what rule sets? Well, there are a few different ways. You can go in and you can organize your rules by function. Maybe you want to do it by functional group like CICS in one rule set and DB2 in another rule set. Or the recommended approach is to organize them so they can be easily filtered. And when you want to set them up for filtering, again, you're going to break them out by the different event types so you can filter for specific events. So rules are only evaluated for those specific events. And then for the message type, we're going to break it out into 3 different rule sets, and I'll show you what those are in a minute. So here's some recommended approach to naming your rule sets. So here you can see we've broken them out by the different event types: journal, CICS, IMS, MQ, so on and so forth. And then at the bottom, you can see we've broken the messages out into 3 rule sets. We have A through H. Then we have I because of the preponderance of messages that start with I. And then we have all the rest of them, J to Z. So we can set filters on these rule sets to eliminate most of the events from being evaluated for those rules. And that makes AutoOperator run much more efficiently. Another consideration is what the order of your rules are within the rule set, right? Because in most of your rule sets, the strategy is going to be first. So you want AutoOperator to scan as few entries as possible till he finds that match. And the way you can do that is if you go into the rule set, looking at the rules, you can sort by the number of hits and you'll see who is firing the most frequently. You want to unsort your rule set and then move those entries to the top of the list. Since they're firing the most, they're going to match the most, and it'll keep AutoOperator from having to scan through all the remaining rules in the rule set. Now, another way you can approach this to improve your processing of your rules is to go into the events display in AutoOperator and look for the ones that have occurred a lot, the events that have occurred a lot that have a handled count of 0. And what you want to do for those, assuming you've looked them up and there's things you don't mind suppressing effectively, you can write a rule, put it at the top of your rule set, have it match that event, and then suppress it, or you could just write a message to the journal. But that approach will eliminate a lot of scans of your rules when they're not necessary, when you can just match it quickly up at the top. We also need to look at the quality of the rules themselves. A few rules that we want to apply to building rules is we want to use trailing wildcards as much as possible because that'll reduce the number of searches that'll need to be done on a string. So if we do something like suppress all the messages that start with WER asterisk, we could probably avoid writing individual rules for a whole bunch of messages that start with WER. Now, another rule you need to follow when writing rules is to not start things with an asterisk, right? Because that forces a lot of comparison operations as the operating system scans through the message text from the beginning to the end, okay? Starting things with an asterisk is a bad approach. If you know that things are parsed into words, it's always preferable to just check the word in the variable dependency panel. Now, it is a good idea to use variables for any data that can be dynamic and change values. It makes it a little bit easier to maintain your environment going forward, and it certainly can eliminate a lot of duplication of rules. So how do rules fire? Well, a lot of things occur within the address space that causes the event to occur. The selection criteria is evaluated there. It's also where you would occur any messages that you're rewording or rerouting. Maybe you're suppressing them or issuing a command. Those things occur in the address space that causes the event. Now, within the AutoOperator address space, when you want to set variables or alerts need to be generated, maybe you write things to the journal, execute execs, those things occur within the MainView AutoOperator address space. So you can see things occur here, things occur there. I'd like to point it out so you're aware that some things do occur outside of AutoOperator. We also need to consider when did you use execs versus rules. Well, there's a rule of thumb. You always want to use rules as much as possible. They just simply run a lot more efficiently than the execs. Typically, you can run 10 rules in the place of one exec in terms of overhead. The BMC development folks say you should always use rules instead of execs where possible. However, there are some things to consider. How much time do you want to commit to managing your automation environment? You can do a lot with several rules, but sometimes it's easier just to write a simple exec that's maybe 4 or 5 lines long, and that can be easier to maintain than 3 or 4 rules that are kind of hooked together. You got to follow through the logic, try to figure out what's going on. Another consideration is how AutoOperator handles variable updates. And it's important to point out that variables are updated from rules asynchronously. So they're not updated right at that moment, they're scheduled to be updated. And that can be a problem when you're using those same variables in your action specifications, because by the time you get to the action, that variable may still be populated with the previous value. Another consideration is that that may also keep subsequent rules from firing because that variable hasn't been updated. Now you can work around this. What you would want to do in those instances is have a variable event that would look for that variable to be updated and then fire your subsequent rule off of that. Now, of course, you could have additional selection criterion as appropriate for the original rule. So let's take a look at combining several rules to build an automation solution. And here our problem is that we have a CICS transaction that keeps appending, and if it keeps appending, we want to disable it until somebody fixes it. So what our solution is going to be three parts. First part, we're going to trap the append, so we know that it happens. We're going to ensure the rate of occurrences is X times in Y minutes, and then we're going to finally issue a CICS command to disable the transaction. So we're going to build three rules. The first rule is going to increase a counter by 1 when there's an append. The second rule is going to decrease a counter by 1 after some period of time, after the append. And then the third rule will take action if the counter ever reaches 5 or more. So here at the bottom, you can see the message that we're going to be trapping. It's a DFHAC 2236, and then you can see the transaction is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, word 6, GR00. So this is what we're going to be trapping and building our automation on. So here we're going to build rule 1, and you can see our rule ID FHAC2236 has an event type of CICS because we're going to trap it off a CICS TDQ. And we'll go to the next. And here my text ID is the same as my rule ID, which is a good standard, and that's what's going to be seen on the TDQ. And the TDQ is CSMT, and I'm looking for that TDQ from any regions that start with C, followed by any character GA. Okay? We got the next screen here. We're going to say we're going to display it at the destination, which is fine. And then you can see we're going to issue a message to the journal with a delay of 500 seconds. And that message is just going to parrot out the message ID that we got from the console. And we're going to specify the job name, which will be the CICS region, and then word 6, which is the transaction ID. So that's going to wait 500 seconds. Then it's going to write a message to the journal. And here, what we're going to do in our end of our first rule is we're going to populate this word 6 variable, and we're going to increment it by +1. So now we need to go in and build our second rule, and this one is going to be a journal rule because it's going to fire off that message that's going to be issued from the first rule, but that doesn't get fired for 500 seconds, right? So we're going to go ahead and enable this journal. And then we'll go here, we'll say the text ID, that's our message ID that we saw come from the journal. Then we're going to check our variable dependencies to make sure that it's greater than 0. And if it is, then we're going to decrement this value by -1. Okay, because that means that it's waited the 500 seconds. So we're going to decrease that counter by 1 so it doesn't fire too frequently. And now we need to define our third rule, which will take to correct the CICS condition. So again, we're trapping the same message ID from the same TDQ and regions. And here in the variable dependencies, we're just verifying that the variable we've been setting is greater than 4. So this has occurred 5 times. And when it does, you can see here in the command type field, we have CIC for CICS. Then we issue the CICS region : and the command to disable the transaction. Okay. So that's what we have for you today. Thank you for your time.